IRIS evolved from the ideas of two pioneer groups. The first was a group of scientists from the Committee on Science and Values of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The second group was an interfaith, religious coalition which hoped to revitalize religion for today's needs. There was a strong recognition that today we can increase the scope and validity of an understanding of our human purpose, not only by reading ancient texts, but also by relating our religious thinking to current science. On November 9, 1954, members of the two groups established IRIS, the Institute of Religion in an Age of Science, to work toward these goals.
Little Man and Fat Boy, two of the most destructive scientific inventions ever, had shown their devastating strength. As the first bomber, Enola Gay, disappeared into the horizon heading home, his co-pilot, Robert Lewis, looked down and said, "My God, what have we done?" 2 whole cities reduced to ashes and dust. Well over 120,000 people dead, 65 of them were below the age of 9, and all in a matter of seconds. The horrific mass destruction had challenged a guilt-ridden scientific community's moral and ethical dilemmas, and a realization dawned that perhaps they had not fulfilled their obligation to American society.
After World War II, the scientists felt guilty in a way that they had not fulfilled their obligation to American society. And by that they meant that they had not shared a knowledge of science with the population in the United States, that they had done their work in secret, that the average educated American didn't know that much about science, and they were afraid that science was being viewed as the enemy of religion and the enemy of morality.
The atomic bomb became the primary focus for the science side, and I think for the religion side, the Holocaust and other terrible things that happened under religious leadership. And so you got a combination of failure of religion and failure of science. And the origins of IRIS are directly attributable to the survival after the Second World War.
At the same time, scientific advancement carried the portent of enormous improvement in the human prospect, and the human scientists seemed to promise understanding that could foster their attainment and help head off catastrophe.
Science gives us the most up-to-date knowledge about the world, about human beings, about societies, and trying to use that knowledge to reinterpret in a worldview how values can be most effectively presented to the wider culture. And one of its significant roots of IRIS is a Committee on Science and Human Values. But people like Burho and Harlow Shapley and Hudson Hoagland were involved in this Committee on Science and Human Values. At that time, trying to bring values into the scientific picture in order to guide human behavior. Burho in 1954 was invited to put on a conference on Star Island by this Coming Great Church group that had been founded in 1950. And so Burho brought all of his friends from the Academy, and they had the first conference here, after which it was decided that one conference wasn't enough. And so the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science was formed.
Over 6.5 decades ago, a journey that IRIS founders took to Star Island is about to set off, carrying the torch forward, buzzing with new ideas and mixing with the best from the scientific and theological world.
When it was founded, it was one of the few bodies in the space of science and religion. Now, of course, there are many, and there are scholars in a way that there weren't. I'm not sure there was any formal program in science and religion in the 1950s when IRIS was founded. Now that field is fairly thick on the ground. So part of IRIS's thinking again is what can we contribute that others may not?
I've benefited personally from one of her projects of transformation in IRIS, that of encouraging the leadership to move from being mostly white men to be more gender inclusive and diverse.
Women matter because if you don't have women presenting, you don't have the whole picture. We had to come up with new ways to explain IRIS. The group that I appreciated was, we take the values of religion and we take the values of, science to make a better world.
We tend to see science and religious thought and practice as a team. The word zygon itself means to yoke together. It's from the word zygote, which is a union of sperm and egg. And also the thinking is we have a yang-yin symbol on the cover. So insofar as Zygon is a publication of IRIS and one other organization, that reflects the yoking idea in IRIS.
The beautiful thing about models is you can take out humans. So you take out the CO2 emissions, right?
So there's hardly any place in academia where there is a really thorough discussion between science and religion going on, where science is taken really seriously, but also religion is taken really seriously. Now Zygon, which is the Journal of Religion and Science, has this special tradition of really engaging deeply between the two practices. It's spread very widely. It's also because it sits with a large publisher, so it's also part of packages. So more than 10,000 libraries have access to the journal, and I think that's a major feat, and it shows impact.
The age of science needs these institutions to help translate the human dimensions of our science so that we can make a larger impact. Yes, it's been very inspirational to be with IRIS because they have that deep sense and knowledge that you can learn from. I'm going to bring my students here.
You did come back! You did come back! You did come back!
So the scientists in IRIS may not believe themselves in religion, but they respect religion. That's number one. Number two, the theologians or the religious scholars or the philosophers in IRIS respect science as well. So there's this opportunity for exchange, and the purpose of that exchange is to make for a better world, a more peaceful world. That's been the traditional structure, the purpose of IRIS.
Certainly, IRIS membership draws people from many different religious traditions. It draws people who were in particular traditions, have left them. It draws people who are not in any, and perhaps never were, in any religious tradition. So it conveys a sense of inclusiveness.
It's not just academics that dominate IRIS. In fact, the kind of incidences that happen at IRIS are often life-changing. Jane Penfield, an artist who has been visiting the IRIS conference for the last 20 years with her scientist husband and regularly conducts the choir, chose a piece of music that appealed to most cultures, a lullaby from the Sephardic Jewish tradition around the Mediterranean in their own language. When one of the speakers requested to attend the rehearsal and the piece started to play, he just could not contain himself.
And he came to the rehearsal, and as we sang this piece, he started to cry. And he said to me, my family was part of the Sephardic community, and that whole community was destroyed during the Holocaust. And I have not heard that language spoken since I was a child. And he said, my mother used to sing that song to me when I was a child. And I had no idea that this piece would have such meaning to someone here, or that I would meet a person who spoke that language from long ago. That's the kind of thing I think that happens at Iris.
When I come as a theologian to something like this, I am not primarily interested in converting someone to a set of religious propositions. What I'm interested in is bringing into the conversation insights which have been developed through theological thinking in different religious systems, deep insights into particularly the nature of the human condition. So for me, it's not necessarily productive to be arguing about what is God, how does God act, but I think what religions do have is a very long tradition of reflecting on the human condition in ways which are different to the way in which science examines perhaps more from at the level of the cellular or the biological. And I think those two things can come together in a very productive way.
Bringing the two together, religion and science, is extremely important. I think that Western culture, since the 17th century, has been limping along because science and religion essentially split. Science went on without too much conscience, and religion became more and more introspective and really silly when it cut itself off from the cosmos and from nature.
Ralph Moreau had a passion that traditional religion, in his case Christianity, though he did work with Judaism and Islam and to some extent Buddhism, he felt that educated people would consider religion not to be credible. And if that be the case, then the morality and ethics opposed from traditional religion would not be credible.
What Ralph Burhall wanted to do was to reform and reformulate traditional religion. He did not throw out a lot of the traditional ideas. And of course, he was passionate about God. When we talk about science and religion, we aren't just talking about trained scientists who earn their living, but we're talking about a kind of background scientific knowledge that most people who've been to college get. And of course, one of the first questions that comes to their minds, if they're at all religious, is to say, I don't know how this religion fits with the science. You know, because in the public discussion, you know, it's the Bible against evolution.
As IRIS membership progressed, so did the debate between religion and science to encompass new thinking, and one of the major issues was God against naturalistic order. Rituals of traditional religions, according to anthropologists, were what carried the hearts of religions, but scientific thinking had an issue with rituals.
The logic of modernity in our own time is coming to fruition. We said many centuries ago that natural science would focus on the natural world, but at a time when everybody understood that human beings had souls and spirits. But over the last 100 years, we've marginalized that, we've forgotten that, or we've said, do it as consenting adults behind closed doors. Don't bring it to conferences, don't bring it to the office.
As far as the religion goes, Institute on Religion in an Age of Science is having at least two prongs. One is the traditional, and people who want to hold on to the traditional symbols and rituals, and also those who want to, in a sense, fashion a new religious outlook.
As the world withers one storm after another, IRIS has done well to keep abreast in taking into consideration the many challenges facing humanity.
The rise of science, we really, in a sense, independent of culture, have discovered things about reality and about the universe, which are remarkable. But there are major issues as well. One is unequal opportunity. The other is what is happening to the planet, to environmental issues.
And the best known amongst them is the fourfold typology of Ian Barber, who has analyzed it, that it varies from conflict to independence to dialogue and ultimately even integration.
Today, IRIS has introduced new elements in its features into how it is progressing towards the future, and the traditionalists and the naturalists are coming closer together.
There's always been an urge in IRIS, okay, we have all this knowledge. What do we do with it now? How do we take it out into the world? How do we use it in activism for social causes, to have science more widely understood and believed, and to help people learn that there is not an inherent conflict between religion and science.
And one of the most brilliant examples that I can think of, which I think IRIS should be proud of and take credit for, is Ursula Goodenough and her work in religious naturalism. And as I understand Ursula, she's not opposed to any of the traditional religions, but that isn't, in her estimation, not where the action is. And so she wants to see what she can do to establish, you might say, new religious forms.
The earth is a garden, the garden of my home, and God walks in this garden in the cool of
the womb people, mammals, were capable of this immense compassion, but the reptilian brain is dictating the mammal and the neocortex brain. So we have to calm that brain first, and then the mammal brain can assert itself. And that is a brain of kinship. That is a brain of the family, of the whole human race, incorporating this wonderful diversity of religions and culture and languages and everything else.
Because there are people of goodwill in every country and race and religion, that they will join hands and do something. And that something can come not only from a deep understanding of what is happening to us in scientific and technological terms, but also in moral and humanistic terms.
In every epoch within the history of ideas in the Western world, we've constructed what it means to be human. Remember that we are natural organisms, and we must emphasize our ethical relationality with the more than human world, without which we would not be.
And IRIS is one of the few places where you can come as a whole human being, bring your heart and your passions, bring your spirit and the way you make meaning of the universe, and bring your understanding of science and what it teaches you about the world, and try to weave them together.
And there can be no better place than Star Island to be that whole human being. And for families with children, this is a star resort which allows a carefree environment for parents to concentrate on the conference whilst their children entertain themselves with child-centered learning and sporting activities.
We don't want a population that's aging and doesn't understand the changing world. We want a population that is integrated. We don't want the siloing of age groups that occurs in the wider community. For many years, religious groups, churches and synagogues and mosques and temples, they took care of the intergenerational component, and at least in the United States, that's greatly diminished. So IRIS is a really rare chance for people to come together in intergenerational ways, to mentor one another. So this week, discussing artificial intelligence, the 4 to 7-year-olds constructed a giant cardboard robot with a lot of accoutrements, and the teenagers were working on things that helped them learn about how computers and coding work. And the middle age of the 9 to 13-year-olds, they weren't as interested in artificial intelligence, but they loved being together. But we did talk about it, and they knew more about virtual reality than I did.
Iris has made a home here on the island of Shoals off the coast of Portsmouth in New Hampshire, which is famous for its history, commitment to sustainability, and has one of the best porches in New England to view the stunning sunsets and sunrise.
I don't start my mornings having a pause in my busyness. So here at Star Island, I've started my days this week with a global view from an existential and spiritual nature, which encompasses sort of the level of our deep humanity connected across thousands of miles of cultures and religions and languages. Star Island and the Institute for Religion and Science makes me feel comfortable as a scientist in a potentially uncomfortable place, which is conventional religions to most scientists.
Students get to learn here at IRIS about how humans are dependent on other species, that there's this mutual interdependence. And if they grow up with that type of mindset, I think they'll be more compassionate human beings.
You know, being on an island, you have to understand what that means about taking care of that environment, because it's, you know, a little micro, it's this little micro world that needs to be taken care of.
Even though we try very hard to have our rules of evidence and, you know, what are the facts, what are the uncertainties, we do bring our own biases and worldview into the doing of science. And, you know, at first you think, oh, that's terrible, because it means science is not a quantitative, 100% fact-based, unbiased thing. It is biased. And that's not all bad, because human creativity also drives science tremendously. You know, a vast majority of the discoveries are made by accident, but it takes a human being to say, oh wow, look at that. The kinds of things you think about when you think about religious tradition, the emotions, the feeling, the soul, that does add to the doing of science, because people get excited about things. You know, that sense of wonder. How do those quarks and gluons actually work? What do they do when you pack zillions of them into a very small space? You know, why do we want to know that? That's kind of in the realm between quantitative things and culture.
One of the few places that sets out consistently to create the kind of conversations where not just scientists can talk to religion, but a scientist who also has a spiritual life can talk to him or herself in a safe environment. Somebody who is explicitly religious in whatever tradition can also engage with the teachings of science and in a safe enough environment.
Been given a brain which has the power to understand and utilize and exploit all these things. But as a trustee, science has had dazzling successes in the last 3 centuries. But we also know that, like miracle antibiotics, it has negative side effects. And those negative side effects can be overcome or ameliorated by genuine religion, which distinguishes revelation from inspiration. That has been one of the problems. And unless we sort that out, I don't think this desirable yoking of science and religion will be possible.
We have the power to give it some direction, not through ego, but feeling that we all have the responsibility and the power to change it.
IRIS is exactly this kind of multidisciplinary, multi-faith community.
It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments, the scroll.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
And if there was ever a time in which we need human persons to grow up and human communities to grow up and whole human societies to grow up and become what colleagues of mine call persons of tomorrow. And that is the deepest promise of any spiritual or psychological tradition worth its salt, that they help us grow into the work not only of today, but the work that prepares us to help co-create tomorrow.
With hands on their hearts, the IRIS membership marches ahead, inviting new challenges and putting their faith in passing on the torch to the new upcoming generation.
The engagement of people because they are interested in and find us to be stimulating, of course, is what we are always trying to do something about by running good conferences. And that has been accompanied by an attempt to reorient us as an organization, although we've always tried to do this, to be more inviting to people, to make clear that anybody who wants to come in and is interested in making a contribution, we're not only receptive, we will, as soon as you indicate a possible interest, grab you and never let you go. but that's a matter of significance to me personally, because that's how I came into IRIS.
Sooner we expose the fact that religion and science are not antithetical, and that there are many different ways of understanding this complex relationship, the sooner we expose that type of thinking to young people, the better off we will be as a species.
That's definitely a highlight and an advantage of this IRIS members, and talking about the older to younger, the connection. So definitely there's a lot of opportunity for mentorship. There are a lot of people who have vast experiences, you know.
It's really necessary to separate yourself from your observations in order to do good science and unbiased science. But yeah, being involved in IRIS has allowed me to see science and scientists as more holistic and more well-rounded.
My hope for IRIS is that we will learn to be good grandparents, but one of the things grandparents can do for young people is encourage them not just from the head, but from the heart and the spirit, and provide protective cover, provide safety in a safe space that they can feel their oats and make contributions, that they don't just do what they're told, but actually figure out what needs to be done.